Hello class, in this presentation we're just going to do a brief overview of the cosmological and teleological arguments to basically prepare you for the next two kind of mini lectures. So in our previous presentation we learned that there are two different types of proofs for God's existence, Aristotelian proofs and Platonic proofs. And of course we are going to begin with the Aristotelian. Now, as we mentioned before as well, in the terms of the Aristotelian proofs, we have two different arguments, the cosmological argument and the teleological argument. Now, there is a single theme that these two arguments have in common, and it is the following: that the existence of the world is contingent or depends upon the existence of a necessary being, God. So in other words, both of the cosmological and teleological arguments start with this logic that the existence of the world depends upon the existence of God, that if there was no God, there would be no world. So how does the cosmological argument establish this idea that God is a necessary being? Well, in the cosmological argument, it is stated that if we analyze the origin and nature of the world, it is apparent that the world depends upon God for its creation. So in other words, the cosmological argument is going to say, okay, if we go back in time to the creation of the universe and we use some, logic, that we will discover that, the world's existence depends upon God. And that if God does not exist, the world would never have been created. Now, in terms of the teleological argument, it establishes that if we analyze the nature of the world and the structure of it, that it is apparent that the world depends upon God for its order and sustainment. So if God does not exist, the world would be in chaos and disorder. So whereas the cosmological argument says, okay, let's go back to the beginning of the world to establish that we need a God to exist, the teleological argument is saying, okay, look out into the world and see how well ordered it is. We have to therefore conclude that God exists to then put it into that order. And if God did not exist, the world would be in chaos. Now, as we learned in the previous presentation, St. Thomas Aquinas is the author of both the cosmological and teleological arguments, so let's learn just a little bit more about him. So St. Thomas Aquinas was a medieval philosopher and theologian dedicated to scholasticism. And inspired by the works of Aristotle, Aquinas established the Roman Catholic concept of natural law. And natural law is the idea that God created the laws and processes of nature. So natural law resembles the divine law, and God created well-ordered processes to sustain creation. So in other words, God basically put in place these laws to kind of order and regulate the natural world. And in studying the behavior of natural law, we can conclude that everything arises through an orderly process of cause and effect, that things do not just appear spontaneously out of nothing, but rather everything has to follow this cause and effect process. And it is important that we grasp this point, this concept of natural law, because Aquinas' proofs are essentially built upon the assumption that the universe follows these orderly processes of cause and effect. And in his masterwork Summa Theologiae, Aquinas develops 5 ways of proving God's existence, but we're going to focus on 2 of those ways. The second way, known as the cosmological argument, and the 5th way, known as the teleological argument. So from here, let's move on to each of their respective lectures.